it's important to underscore that a lot of couples, as you said in other contexts, think of conflict as an indication of a problem.
Yeah.
And therefore,
Yeah.
if you really love God, you're not going to have conflict.
Right,
And,
yeah.
and I want to say, if you love God, you have to have conflict.
Exactly right. Hey, you guys, it's Greg, and I'm honored to have a special guest, Dr. Dan Allender, with me today. Dan and I go way back. We haven't seen each other in a little while, so I've got a lot of questions. But we're thrilled to have you here with us today, so thanks for coming on.
Oh, Greg, what an honor. Thank you.
All right, so you've been married 48 years,
Yeah.
so congratulations.
Thank you.
Do you have big plans for your 50th yet?
We actually do.
Do you really?
We have begun the process of creating the drama that 48 years now, as we get those extra 2, deserve.
That's a great, that's a really good way to put it. So tell me real quick, just in the briefest way, your love story. So how did you guys meet and fall in love?
Oh, this is not going to be short.
Okay.
But let me say,
As long as it's good, that's
we,
all right.
we began in 10th grade.
Did you really?
I,
High school
Allender,
sweethearts.
first door, first desk, right by the door. She was Gilbert, 1 row over, 3 seats back. But I was just not brave enough to actually ask her out.
Yeah.
But I would pretend as if we were from Brooklyn as we left the door, and I got about 40 seconds with her before I went to another class. And that was the beginning of intrigue. She was kind, she was playful. There was a level of goodness that I saw in her that I didn't see in anyone else.
An amazing, back in the 10th grade.
But I just grieved that I didn't have the courage to ask her out. But it took, from that point,
you did at some point.
5 years, 6 years,
Okay.
until we encountered one another in the context of spring break.
Okay.
It's a long story, but to say that I met her on the beach, and we ended up in a conversation. And
Love again at first sight.
well, it began at the level of, I had her with us, with about 20 other folks, and I saw a friend begin to make a move toward her.
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't know what to do.
I like this girl. That's not
I'm going to say I'm a moderately awkward human being, that all I could think to do was, I asked her, would you like to take a trip to Pluto? She said yes. So we ended up taking blankets and ice buckets as helmets out to the beach, and I flew her to Pluto for about 3 hours and then brought her back. That was the
48 years
beginning.
later.
It was the beginning.
See? So when you're on a dating app, go ahead and lead with, can I fly you to Pluto? I've never heard that one, so.
I know.
love
Let's just say it's more significant with other details, but it is a good beginning to say it was not a normal relationship.
But hey, 48 years later, I always love to, one of my favorite questions to ask couples who've been married long term. Aaron and I have been married 33 years.
Yeah.
48 though, you've got a bunch of years on us. So if you could go back to that day that you stood at the altar, what advice would you give that younger you about marriage and now all of what you know looking back? What advice would you give yourself?
I think the central thing I would say is leaving your mother and father doesn't have a lot to do with the physical location or the financial.
Okay.
This is the issue of loyalty and the issue of your heart in relationship with people who have been very significant, no matter how good or ill they've been.
Right.
And now you're making this transition to a brand new relationship that even though you know one another, you don't know one another.
Yeah.
And so that transition is a lifetime process.
Yeah.
So knowing what it means to leave the good, the ill, the heartbreaking, and yet the glorious, to leave is a deep work of God. And false loyalty to our families oftentimes is one of the major intrusive powers that keeps couples from really being able to grow. So I wish I could have
That's great advice.
if everything was frozen,
Yeah.
to be able to stand with that young man and say, you have no clue how bound you are to your mother.
Yeah. You're
And-
going to feel like you're living on Pluto here if you don't figure this one
And
out.
Pluto will be
Yeah.
better for you
It'll be safer.
than the
less
process.
conflict. Yeah.
So it was and is an ongoing process. And I think if I had known
great
that,
advice.
I would have helped us both alleviate a lot of suffering.
That's good. Aaron and I, I would say our biggest conflict in those early years was with my family. And to your point, I just didn't understand what leaving, cleaving. I love the Genesis 2:24 verse that you're referencing. I didn't get it in how multifaceted it is. You've recently written a book called The Deep-Rooted Marriage, which when I think about that Genesis 2:24, talking about the word leaving that you talked about, it is easy to kind of think about leaving just around our family, like you were saying.
Right.
But right, it's also about understanding the baggage that I'm bringing in. We all are bringing in big trauma, little trauma.
Yeah.
We're bringing in family dynamics. We're bringing in all this stuff. How do you encourage a couple, even as they're getting married or been married like us 33 years, to really address kind of that stuff that we really need to leave behind?
I think most people really do hold to the reality of baggage. And I love that we can begin with that word. But if we go further to the reality that we bring brokenness,
Okay.
we bring a reality of our own heartache and harm, but also
Pain.
our own defensiveness for how we've attempted to mitigate something of that harm. And so I was the one in my family that kept my mother, who was a pretty fragmented human being, as cohesive, as whole as she could be. And I did so by storytelling. So it's not that big of a deal that I take my future wife on a 3-hour trip to Pluto. That's how I kept my mom sustained.
That was kind of your role.
But when I began to tell stories, and my wife loved it in the beginning, then
Cute,
she began
adorable.
to tire. And now she's violating the implicit vow she made. I will always love your stories.
Right.
And in order to escape conflict, I'll just storytell.
Okay.
And she wanted to deal with conflict. And in that, it opened the door to having to deal with things that I didn't want to have to. So when we begin to see the baggage, brokenness, and then be able to say, marriage, it is really, truly, truly, truly about transformation. But I don't find many couples actually saying from the beginning, let alone through the 20th, 30th, 40th, 50th year, I am meant to become a radically different human being because of this relationship. And I want that. I actually want to see that kind of transformative disruption, but cohesion that occurs. So that's where I would say the big issue of a Christian marriage, for many people, that's following certain structures. And I love that. But also deeply becoming like Christ, meaning it is a sanctifying process that's not easy. It's going to demand a whole lot more than what most of us early presumed.
In my family growing up, similar to you, you were more of a storyteller. My role was to kind of learn how to be the mediator, to mitigate the conflict by using humor. And so in the same way, like you're saying, when I got married and Erin was frustrated or she wanted to talk about something serious, man, I could be very funny and I'd try to get her laughing, and she'd get so frustrated going, okay, I want to have a serious conversation. And in my mind, I'm like, this is what always worked. Like, what's wrong with you? Like, you should be happy now. Thus, we shouldn't have to deal with whatever was going on.
And what I know of you, you're very bright and very witty.
You're the first one that's ever said that, so I'll accept that. So thank
You better.
You.
You better. But in that, you're depending on God-given gifts. and they're beautiful, and they are a revelation of how he made you in the image of God.
Right.
Yet what we often don't look at is our brokenness and our beauty simultaneously. And nobody on the earth has seen me at my best and at my worst.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, every marriage is at some level this extremity of a taste of heaven and hell. And if we own that it's not just merely to be resolved, but actually an opportunity for us to be reformed in a sense,
to grow,
of becoming who we're meant to be.
Totally.
It's taken a long time, and I still at one level want to go, no, come on, it's just about getting along and having fun and enjoying one another. But
it's powerful the way you put that, because God's had me lately in Ephesians 5, 26 and 27. That's where Paul, the Apostle Paul, is kind of describing Christ as husband, his wife being the church, and he's going through and saying, I know you know all this. He's talking about how that he will make her holy and blameless and present her to himself in all these beautiful ways. And when I first would read it, I never would connect with the words, holy and blameless, and just all these words that just I can't even remember, because they're just words I never would connect with. So I just would blow through those two verses and get into the good stuff, the cherish and the nourish and all this other stuff. And I really felt, for whatever reason, felt like I really want to dig in to understand. And if I'm understanding it correctly, what we're being told, Paul is saying this is what Jesus did, that he is nurturing his wife so that she becomes the best version of who God created her to be, so that ultimately she can be unleashed. And I love that because that's what you're talking about. That sanctification, that growth mindset is not just, it's not only for my benefit, but it's how am I helping Erin become the best version of who God created her to be.
And I love that, because it opens the door that my role as a husband is to die. And I don't like that at all. But the reality of I am meant to be the one to own my own baggage brokenness, my own false loyalty, my own sin. And if we talk about sin in a marriage, we're talking about lust and anger, adultery and murder. Already the language of Jesus feels hyperbolic and a little extreme. Couldn't you have toned that down just a little? But then
a wee bit.
To own it in a way in which, lust is a form of using. Anger is a form of vengeance and making her pay. And when a dish rag was not completely dry, and she looked at me and she said, "What, are you afraid of that dish rag?"
Yes.
And I'm like, "What? What's the deal?" Well, I already get the field of, I'll counter you in the moment of any kind of, it's not, "Oh, honey, is that disappointing to you?" "Oh, I really meant to."
And I debate, defend.
It's like, what's the big deal? So already
make it an issue.
I'm not particularly interested in seeing her become the whole person she's meant to be.
Because pride, right? A big part of it, not the only thing, but pride gets in the way for me all the time. And then I feel that righteous indignation of going, okay, you arguing about the dish, like, really? Everything that's going on, everything I've been through today, why would you even want to talk about this?
Spec. And then to be able to go, what she's actually naming is the log in my eye, which is not the dish rag, but is a lack of attentiveness in a context in which I don't bring the same level of care into the kitchen that I might with regard to how I keep my books. Or how I go about my writing projects. So what she's saying ultimately is, you're consistent where it matters to you, but where it doesn't matter to you, but it matters to me. Every marriage is this daily, weekly, monthly process of invitation through exposure to a level of humility, but a level of honesty. And then to be able to go, okay, I want to bring up a few issues of yours as you bring this, and I know what I'm doing is just trying to create a don't bug me because I'm going to make you
Right.
pay.
I'll deflect on,
Yeah.
let's talk about your issues before we
Right.
talk about the log in my own eye. The speck is much easier, right?
Absolutely.
To see in her eye. And all that brokenness that you're talking about
Yeah.
certainly creates conflict. So as you reflect on 48 years of not only marriage, but of the work that you do with couples, what encouragement can you give to couples? So as all of our stuff gets stirred up and that brokenness is,
Yeah.
the alarms blaring, how do they begin to approach conflict maybe in a different way?
Well, I've loved your work on conflict. And it's important to underscore that a lot of couples, as you said in other contexts, think of conflict as an indication of a problem.
Yeah.
And therefore, if you really love God, you're not going to have conflict.
Right.
And I want to say, if you love God, you have to have conflict.
Exactly, right.
And that conflict is not primarily there for you to resolve by some form of compromise.
Right.
Which, again, compromise is fine.
Fine.
But there is a lack of intrigue and curiosity about differences that tend to be the basis of conflict. So if we had an understanding, we can be in conflict, but without contempt.
Yeah.
And contempt is, from my standpoint, one of the great killers of all intimacy.
It's more like combat versus that healthy conflict you're referring to.
So if we can have, we differ, we're gonna get in there.
That's the beautiful part of the marriage. We're so different.
Indeed.
And that's good to celebrate those
So
differences.
if we can now argue or talk in a way in which I'm going to present my view, she's going to present her view, but if there can be the curiosity of, how did you come to this?
Yeah.
How did you see the reality you're seeing? Because I don't see it quite the way you see it. If we had that openness to a level of curiosity, not a lack of, shall we say, intensity, but a growing sense of compassion in the midst of that curiosity.
Curiosity of what's been triggered in you, what's happening, what's going on. I love it in 1 Peter where it talks about, so again, it's talking to a husband about live with your wife in an understanding way.
Yes.
Just I was digging into that word understanding as a Greek word. In one of the other ways that it can be translated is live with your wife in a knowledgeable way. And that's that curiosity going, man, there's probably something here that I'm missing.
And if I'm remembering the same passage, it's also implying so that your prayers will be answered.
Right.
So that's a condition. Like you don't actually labor to understand and have compassion for your spouse. It's
going to hinder your
bound
prayers.
to your ability to see really effective prayers. And I love the fact that Peter links how we relate to one another to how we relate to one another.
Which is, that is exactly right.
Yeah.
So as couples dig in to their conflict, and I love the word you use, that invitation. It reminds me of like a James 1:2, as you go through trials, consider that an opportunity. And it's that same kind of thing. There's something here that we can take away from. I know that it's based on our history and the baggage and the brokenness that we bring in, that it might be harder. But as we dig in to go, boy, I want to learn something here. I want this invitation. How would you encourage a couple? Maybe they haven't handled conflict well in the past. Kind of what are some things they can even do tonight, let's say, when the dish rag is going to be wet and irritating?
This will be a long night if you choose this. But do you know the stories that have led to something of how you react in the world of conflict? And so my wife grew up with a very cruel and a very, at one level, vindictive mother.
Okay.
And she learned at a very young age, keep your mouth shut.
Gotcha.
I grew up, as I said, with a very unstable, the term would be borderline personality disordered mother. And I learned that conflict between my mother and I actually helped her resolve some of the intensity of what she was going through. So you've got two separate worlds.
Totally.
A woman who's learned, keep your mouth shut. And a young boy who's learned, keep talking and bring intensity, because it actually helps seemingly resolve. So imagine the conflict that occurs. Well, I may be very vocal, and Becky is going to engage, but at some point feel a level of threat.
Yeah, she's gonna shut down.
I need to be able to read her face when something in her gets triggered, but she's now backing off. It could be because I'm just not being kind. It could be that indeed something of her own history is playing out right now. So if we don't have our stories, we really don't have a map. And we're in dangerous terrain in many conflicts. I mean, that's true for most couples. If you don't have a map, you don't have a GPS, you don't have a way to make your way through this. And stories, I believe, really are. So to the degree you know, well, my husband had an alcoholic father. That's not a story, that's a fact.
That's a fact, yeah.
So
That's a
do you
detail,
know what it was like when he felt humiliated by his father? Do you know stories where you get an understanding, but you also have a level of honor and grief for that young boy that's still present, even in a 40, 50, 60-year-old body? So to the degree we hold one another's stories with understanding, as you put it brilliantly, but also with compassion, not excusing,
Empathy.
not defending, but understanding, we've got more language now. So I can say to Becky, I feel like you're backing off. And for her to be able to say, I do feel right now threatened. To be able to then say, what about? And for her to be able to discern and say, I don't think it's really you right now. I'm needing 10 minutes or 15 minutes to just go take a walk and engage what's happening in my heart. So the ability to be in conflict,
response,
be able to honor a different dance than how you perhaps engaged it in the past, but having that ability to know one another's story well enough to be able to come alongside each other, even when you feel somewhat hurt or triggered, I think it's a huge difference.
That's great. I love that idea of do you know your spouse's story? Or do you have a couple favorite questions as you coach couples to kind of learn the stories?
Thank you. I do, but let's just say I borrowed it from someone far better than me.
You know, who we've all done that, right?
Well, it's the question in Genesis 3. Where are you? The question is, how
so after the sin has happened, they've eaten the fruit.
How do you hear God saying that sentence? Do you hear it with condemnation? Do you hear it with disappointment? Do you hear it with anger? Or do you hear it with kindness and invitation? Where are you, Adam? So there are just many, many, many times
really good,
that Becky has to just say to me, where are you? I'm here. Well, I can see your body. That's not the question. Where's your heart? And to be able to say, I'm thinking about a project. I'm having a conversation, but I'm actually somewhere else. Thank you. Thank you for letting me know, because that's what I felt. So that question of where are you? And then I think a second question for us is, are you open to hearing what I'm feeling? Just, there are moments in my marriage.
As a request.
Yes.
Otherwise, a demand is no is not an acceptable option. So you're saying genuinely,
are you open?
And if no is the right answer, then.
And there are moments
Yeah.
where I can truly say, I'm not ready. I would need a bit of time.
I need to go take a walk.
Right.
Yeah.
So that question is, again, back to the word invitation. So I think when we are inviting, it opens up a different level of choice than with, you need to hear, I'm hurt right now. And there are moments where that's totally appropriate.
Yeah.
But isn't it more powerful to say, I have a lot going on inside of me. Are you open to hearing?
Yeah.
And then underneath that is, can we make a commitment, even though we will fail, can we make a commitment to be a contempt-free marriage? That's a big one.
Because I mean, that's one of those words like someone's going, I think I know what you mean by that. So talk a bit about what might contempt show up as inside the marriage?
It's a great question, but what I would say is, have you ever had an adolescent in your family?
Yeah, that solved it for me, yes.
It can be an eye roll. It can be, I'm not going to try and raise one eyebrow,
Yeah.
but one
Yeah.
kind of a
The angry eyes that I get from my youngest daughter.
tone, like,
Why are you talking to me? Sorry, I'm going to a bad dark place here.
no,
Sorry.
like, what's up? What's wrong? I mean, just versus, and you might say, oh my gosh, I'm being assessed on the basis of my tonality. And the answer is absolutely.
Right.
So for both of us to be able to go, judgment, that's what contempt is. It's a judgment against the other in some way that creates distance. Versus, oh, I'm not happy, I'm hurt, I'm angry, but I want to engage, not to justify and not to resolve, but to be connected with one another. When that
big
becomes
difference.
the frame,
Yeah.
it's really different.
That is powerful. And as I'm hearing you, just that willingness to show up, thinking story, knowing the story, so that when Erin and I get into these moments, I have some perspective. I can tell by the look or whatever she's doing that probably something's gotten stirred up. Maybe me, maybe to your point, maybe something that she brought in from her childhood. But that agreement between us that we're not going to do the contempt, we're not going to do the combat.
Yeah.
Let's do this in a way that honors both of us, that keeps our hearts open, that allows us to really move through this conversation. That's powerful. And I love you thinking about, hey, going back to that younger me 48 years ago.
Yeah.
I so appreciate that, that advice that, it's hard to learn how to leave and to cleave. You've given some great tools for us to think about how that's going to look. So thank you for the great work you've done.
Thank you. Honored to
This is a
be with
great
you.
conversation. I could literally just sit here and do this for another couple hours. You'd probably miss your flights and everything.
No,
I would be happy.
It's out in the evening, so we can go from.
But seriously, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for being a part of the conversation. If you found this information helpful, go ahead and like the video. Don't forget to subscribe for weekly videos because we want to see your family thrive in Christ.